And how can you allow yourself to be with what is and to express what needs to be expressed? And this is a journey, particularly, our whole culture is all about numbing. It's all about distraction. It's all about, keeping us on social media, distracting us from just sitting and being with that which is uncomfortable. Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. Hey, and welcome to this solo episode of Death on the Daily. Today, we are going to be rooting into what I call echoes of the past. So these are when we go through, for example, losing someone or other really deeply painful and traumatic experiences, how we can get what I call echoes of the past, which is where, perhaps it's that grief or it's some anxiety or something else that reverberates through our body, a bit like, I suppose, like a gong or a bell has been struck, and we just feel it in our body. And actually, when it's related to something painful, for me personally, in my journey with our daughter, that is both in obviously the pain of her loss, but also in the anxiety that I feel that's rooted into very specific experiences from that path. So, for example, the scan where we got her diagnosis, and different stages of us losing her. And actually, these echoes of the past can be real messengers of where we need to give some TLC and some attention to. And in my recent episode with Liv Nunn, which is literally just one back, so if you haven't checked it out, make sure that you go and give that a listen or a watch. And in that episode, she spoke to the pain of losing her mum at just the age of 13 and how she then numbed that grief. But it then came out when she became a mum herself, as well as another echo of the past when she was navigating a health scare. And that brought up again a huge amount of feelings and fears and anxieties rooted in her experience with her mum. So very much inspired by our conversation, I wanted to really, really connect into this element because it feels so alive in me at the moment, from the perspective of obviously Liv courageously sharing her story through that episode, but also everything that she does with Mums Without Mums, which is a community that she's founded. But also for myself, in the past month, I've been navigating the 1 year anniversary since we lost our daughter, and within that including her stillbirth as well. So obviously for me as well, I've been feeling those echoes of the past coming up, and I've also felt how random they can be, how oftentimes when I least expect it, they come through, or on those days like her birthday when I expect that it's going to feel really tender and really painful, that actually it feels pretty normal and there's a lot of joy to be found. So I also know how these echoes of the past can really hit us at random times, but I also know how ill-equipped we are as society to really, I suppose, be there for each other through these, because we don't speak to death, because it's pushed into the shadows, because the dominant culture is very much, you should be over this by now. There's a lack of understanding that actually grief is with us for life. We grow around our grief. And actually, similarly, when we go through really painful, and traumatic experiences equally, we are like Russian dolls. I had lots of Russian dolls growing up because I am part Russian. Yeah, and actually my nan, she brought me back lots of different Russian dolls from her travels to Russia when I was younger. So I always think of myself as these little layers from that tiny little, that little child, the inner child, all the way out to big me. And this is the thing, we are layers of our experience. And actually those experiences can really lay roots down into us, into our body. And actually, for me in this past month, it's obviously I felt grief. And if I tune into where I feel it in my body, I feel the grief. It's in my chest. It's definitely the epicenter is in my heart. I feel that pain. I shared on a previous podcast that actually I've come to acceptance that pain is, in some way omnipresent, but actually sometimes it roars a little or a lot louder. But equally, I know that when I feel anxiety about what happened, I know it's up here in the top of my chest. So I wanted to share a few ways that from my conversation with Liv as I went away and journaled and I integrated, but also as I've been navigating my path, just a few different kind of practical things that are really integrating on how we can be with these echoes of the past. What can we connect into that can also be supportive of us, and how can we nourish ourselves as we do? So firstly, I wanted to root us into acceptance, because actually what's happening is normal. You've been through a lot. Your body's held a lot. And actually, if you've numbed and you've suppressed, and I put myself in this bracket, there's so much stuff in my life that I've numbed out to, I've suppressed. And what that does is it just sort of pushes it down. And sometimes, like when you shake up a bottle of fizzy drink, it just needs to explode and come out in some way. So if you feel those echoes of the past, how can you accept that actually feeling what you're feeling is a normal part of healing and of grieving? And how can you allow yourself to be with what is and to express what needs to be expressed? And this is a journey, particularly, our whole culture is all about numbing. It's all about distraction. It's all about, keeping us on social media, distracting us from just sitting and being with that which is uncomfortable. So actually, it can be a journey. And there's definitely, with our daughter, I was very present and very connected, and I allow myself to feel, but I know that there's many other aspects of my life that I'm just unearthing now with this awareness and those echoes of the past where I have numbed and I have suppressed. And what happens is that means that they do come out in, bursts of anger, frustration, tears, me feeling like I literally hit the wall emotionally. So actually, when something and you feel it in your body or emotions, you feel like they're bubbling up, how can you allow it to be? Tears and all. And as Liv spoke to as well, when we numb, there's every likelihood that it's going to come out at that later date. So again, perhaps some of this is tuning in, where do I feel like I am distracting? Where do I feel like I'm numbing? And we come on to that a little bit later on in this episode. Next up, we've got the importance of grounding and really supporting and nourishing you and your nervous system. So I've got a toolkit of practices. It's so important to me. And as soon as I feel those echoes of the past, reverberating through me, I stop and I nourish myself. And actually, I've got a toolkit that changes dependent on how I'm feeling in those moments, because as I shared on an earlier episode, I am being treated for PTSD that's related to specifically the scan. And actually, when my anxiety that is triggered through that comes through, sometimes I don't want to meditate and I don't want to close my eyes because it doesn't feel safe. And breath work isn't right for me then, because connecting into my breath is only, exacerbating those symptoms. So I've got a varied toolkit that does range from meditation, from breath work, all the way through to really simple practices, like, for example, shaking my body, jumping up and down, or dancing, or, singing, or humming, or going outside to just slowly take in the horizon around me as I feel my feet on the earth. I've got varied practices, but when I feel in my body, oh, okay, there's an echo of the past from my grief, there's some anxiety that's definitely rooted in something of my past, I always make sure first thing is, how can I nourish myself? And our toolkit should be personal to us. So as Jill Ritchie shared, that there's so many free resources out there as well. We don't need to spend lots of money on this toolkit. YouTube has a plethora of free resources that you can go to and try different things out and really tune into your body. I always say there's no one size fits all here. Tune in and see what, does make you feel even 5% more grounded, more relaxed, more centered. So next up, it's about really starting to connect in gently to where are you avoiding and numbing out. And for me, I know I am in peak avoidance when I go on social media for copious amounts of scrolling. And when I do, I ask myself, what am I avoiding sitting with? And when I ask that question, I tune into my body. What am I feeling in my body? And actually, this past weekend, for example, I was definitely avoiding and numbing out. And where that led me to was onto threads. I used to be a Twitter fiend in these situations. And my version of numbing out is let me go into the sort of political conversation on Twitter and just be doom scrolling there. And I can do it for hours. And actually, on this past weekend, I'm no longer on Twitter. I'm now on threads. And I was doing it this past weekend. I was literally just scrolling, 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 scrolling. And when I do that, I've really started to connect into my body and to see it doesn't nourish me. It doesn't do anything. And it actually doesn't do specifically anything to ease. For example, this last weekend is when I was feeling anxiety in my chest. I didn't know what the cause was. It was just, again, an echo of the past that came through. But actually, when I'm scrolling, it only heightens that. It only makes me feel more agitated, more on edge. So in those moments when I bring that awareness to that avoidance or numbing, and I can ask myself, is there anything I can tune into? What could I be avoiding sitting with? But also, in those moments, we have a choice. And I knew I had a choice. Do I continue scrolling or do I go and do, which I eventually, after in truth, a couple of hours did, which was I'm going to go and do some yoga now. And it was actually pushing through that resistance, that dopamine hit that I get from being on social media, which is short-lived and not truly nourishing me, to be able to say, no, actually, I need to do something where I'm going to be moving in my discomfort. I'm going to allow what is in my body to express through, but I'm going to be present to that. And I say this point with a little bit of grace and compassion because, oftentimes we can get sucked in. And so don't beat yourself up about it. And for me, even if I bring that awareness in after I've had a weekend where I know I've been, for example, numbing out like this last one, I might reflect on the Sunday night and say, okay, I see that. Can I give myself that time and that space to connect in and see what was coming up now? And finally, when those echoes of the past come through, and whether it's in those echoes of the past where we've been numbing out and they erupt, or those ones where it is just something that is within us and different experiences or just life can trigger it and have it bubbling up through. How can you be with that, even just for one breath at a time? With that acknowledgement that, yes, it might feel very tender, painful, might feel quite anxious. But if you were to just make that commitment of one breath at a time, I'm going to be here, I'm going to be present to it. And again, circling back to that wonderful toolkit of practices that help you to find mindfulness, grounding, presence, nourishment in those moments. How can you root into those as a way to help you to support yourself as well as to be with what is? And then obviously, within that, also making sure that you are seeking out the support that you need, as well as speaking your truth. Liv shared that sometimes when she's had in her motherhood journey offers of help, it actually, it isn't right. And it's not a replacement for her mum. And it's okay to speak your truth. It's okay to ask for space when you need it. And it's also okay to, seek out help when you need it. In fact, it's more than okay. It's definitely what you need to be doing. And so finally, ending this episode, as I do with all of my Notes to Self episodes, with my personal notes to self. So this is in my journaling what I wrote to myself after my conversation with my last guest, in this case with Liv. And these are notes that, if they resonate, please take them forwards. Please speak them to yourself. Please, make them your own. Or perhaps join me in this practice of writing these notes to self as you navigating, whether it's grief or other really, really painful and difficult moments, as well as obviously those notes to self that you can write to yourself in the joyful times. So for today's notes to self, I've written, like a Russian doll, we are created of layers of our past experiences. When uncomfortable echoes from the past arise, I will stop and honor me then and the challenges that I navigated. Honoring my courage, even if at the time it felt like nothing, like it was just putting one foot in front of the other, it really was something. Plus, I will honor myself now with the soothing and nourishment that I need, allowing myself to feel anything that I did not have the capacity to back then, softly and gently, one breath at a time. So that completes this episode of Death on the Daily. And wherever you are in your journey, whatever echoes of the past are coming through for you, I am sending you lots and lots of love. All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside, and we'll never, never make it, and we'll never, never break.